Thank you.
Okay, welcome everyone to our star party for today, April 24th, 2021. We're going to give a moment for folks to join us on Zoom here. If you haven't already, make sure you turn off your video camera while you're on, so we keep the YouTube stream clear. Welcome everyone. My name is Aaron Bannister, and I'm going to be your MC for today, or this evening. We've got a lot to go over, or a lot of cool stuff for you today. So, first off, a few announcements. I'd like to acknowledge and respect the Coast Salish and Lekwungen speaking peoples upon whose traditional territory the observatory stands, and the Songhees, the Esquimalt, and Wasanic nations whose historical relationships with the land and the sky we all share continue to this day. As well, I'd like to remind everyone to either join the Friends of the DAO or renew your membership. If you do that this April or May, you'll also get a free gift delivered with your membership package. Also, if you're watching this on YouTube, please like this video and subscribe so we can reach more people with our star parties and more content going forward. And you can find us all over social media with the tag @FriendsDAO, all lowercase, no spaces. That's FriendsDAO. Now, to start us off here, I believe we have Lori Roche, who's going to be telling us about the International Day of Astronomy coming up next month. Lori, you want to pop on video?
Yeah. Okay. It says the host has stopped it. So somebody put me back on. Good. Calvin or Aaron?
Yeah.
We're on it. One of us will.
Okay.
I did it.
Does that work?
Thanks, Amy.
There we go.
There you are.
All right, thank you. I love technology so much. Hey everybody, I'm Lori Roche with the Friends of the DAO and with the Royal Astronomical Society. And coming up in less than a month now, we have what is called the International Astronomy Day, and it will be held on May 15th this year, which is a Saturday, which is a great day because then we can have our regular star party right on the actual day of International Astronomy Day. So if I could, I'm just going to share my screen, and I'm going to start just a little bit of a slideshow, just to kind of get you going here. So pre-COVID, we had a International Astronomy Day every year, except for last year. It was the first time in 2020 that we hadn't had one for years and years. And we have been at the museum mostly for the day. During the day, the RASC would host a great big celebration with speakers and with all kinds of people and children's programs and all kinds of things going on. And in the evening, we opened up the Center of the Universe for our for presentations in the evening and for night sky viewing. And we were also at UVic for a little while. For one or two years, we were over at UVic, but we've flipped back over to the museum and have been there. And I'm thinking that next year, oh my goodness, let's cross fingers, that we'll be back again there this year or next year. So this year, of course, we're going to be back on for a virtual event, and we're going to be on streaming, hopefully with the weather permitting. We're going to be streaming from the Plaskett Telescope, the deck of the Center of the Universe, and we also have got some live streaming from different places on the Lower Island. We have got people who are going to be streaming the night sky from their houses and their backyards and their driveways, and also up from the Malahat and up into Duncan. So hopefully we'll be able to get some good streaming going on from there. We're going to be on from 7 o'clock in the evening to 11 p.m. That's Pacific time, and we're going to be using for this specific event, the national webinar program from the Royal Astronomical Society National. So we're going to be it's going to be a on a webinar format, which means we'll have panelists and the people will be on. You'll be able to do question and answer. You'll be able to do chat, but we won't be able to actually see you because this is going to be going live across Canada. Now we know that, of course, from 7 to 11 means that it's from 10 until 2 Eastern time, and that we may not get some people, but we are going to be one of the only programs that are going to be live right across Canada. So hopefully some people from different provinces will be joining in. And the hosts will be the Royal Astronomical Society of Canada and the Friends of the DAO. Our feature speaker, we're very happy to have Dr. Kim Venn from the University of Victoria speaking to us about some of the stars, which are the fossils of our galaxy, looking at what we call metal poor stars that show us what the evolution of the stars are and evolution of our galaxy is. So they go way back. So she's going to be talking a little bit about that. And so she's our speaker. But for the evening, we have got quite a few things going on. Starting at 7, between 7 and 7:30, we're going to have kind of an ongoing loop of the virtual tour of the DAO with historic images that we have from the Plaskett, just to get everybody kind of going. From 7:30 to 8, we'll have the our new solar telescope that we have up on the deck of the DAO, of course, weather permitting. And we'll be showing some live streaming of the sun. Please have the weather be okay for that day. And we'll be doing some solar imaging from there. The official welcome will be starting at 8 o'clock with introductions and announcements and things coming on. And then Kim Venn will be speaking from 8:15 to 8:45 and questions and discussion and everything after that. And then at 9 o'clock, we're going to be hosting a virtual tour of the UVic telescope. So it all kind of just blends in with UVic here. And Karun Thanjavar is going to be up at the UVic telescope and giving us a little bit of a tour of that telescope as well. And then at 9:15 to 9:30, we're going to be having an Ask an Astronomer booth. We always have one of these at our IAD parties. And this year, we're going to be having Nathan Hellner and Jason Beeman, who are going to be our 2 Ask an Astronomers. And so at the beginning of the evening, at any time before this, we're going to be asking people to see if they can stump the astronomers and ask questions. And then these 2 young people are going to be helping us to answer some of them. From 9:30 to 9:45, we're going to go into the planetarium and have a little bit of a planetarium show. And we're hoping to get some good stories from some of our Indigenous friends and neighbors across Canada. We're going to be working on that. And then from 9:45 to 10, we have an astrophotography gallery that we are making. Margie Wellstream from the RASC is helping to make up photographs to show everyone that some of the different people have been working on. And then from 10 to 11, we're going to be live streaming from the Plaskett telescope, from the deck of the CU, and then other places in Victoria. So I know that David Lee David Lee has been kind of working on what we call an EAA group, or an electronic assisted astronomy, and has got a number of people who are going to be putting together and streaming from their own backyards and see what we can find from there. And if it is not very nice that night, then they are going to have some pre-recorded images. And we have got some UVic students who are going to be doing some narration, some live narration of some of the things that you're going to be able to see. So we've got lots of things planned for the evening. We hope that you'll dip into some of the places. If you can't stay for the whole night, that you'll find some part of this that you'd like to come into, and you'll be welcome to be with us. So this is the registration for IAD. Because of the webinar, we'd like to have a registration of people. Very simple. You've probably done it before. Is you can go to this page. This will be on our website will be on our social media, and you'll just simply have to, you'll just register for the program, and then you'll receive a confirmation email from that, and then it will also give you a reminder that it's coming up, and hopefully you'll be able to join us. So please put May 15th down as your as a day, so 3 weeks from now, that you'll be able to come in and join us for International Astronomy Day. Okay, thanks everybody. I'll stop.
All right, thank you, Lori. I'm excited for it. It's
Yes.
been a long time since I've seen Kim Venn speak, since taking her stellar astrophysics class. I've heard that she's been doing some really cool things with her research over the past couple of years, so I'm very excited for it.
Yeah.
And do you want to post that Zoom link, the registration link, in the Zoom chat so that Calvin and Amy can send that out onto the YouTube stream as well? Just so people don't have to copy it from your slide. That would be great.
Oh, right. Okay. Yes. Yeah. I'll do that. Okay. Thanks.
Fantastic. Thanks, Lori.
Clear?
And of course, we will post that on our website, and I'm sure it'll be going out on social media as well if you miss it today. Okay, next up, we have Don Moffat with What's Up in the Sky Tonight. Don, do you want to join us on video?
Sure. Hi, everybody, and welcome. Thanks for attending tonight. I hope you're all doing well. And so I'd just like to talk a little bit about what we can see in the nighttime sky, as Aaron just said, and just flip over to that. And so this is a view tonight, assuming there are no clouds, over towards the west. And we can see that the winter constellations are still sinking towards the horizon. And this would be sort of more in twilight, I would say. And one of the things that is coming up very soon is that Mercury and Venus will be reappearing in our sky. But if you're a typical amateur astronomer, you'll know that sometimes things get in the way. So we have to remove the ground here. And you can see that Venus and Mercury are just on the horizon right now. So they'll become more prominent in coming weeks. So that's something to look forward to. But for now, it's down behind that tree in the distance. And so this time of year, we can, or actually I should say that Mars is still visible. We can see it up here, a little bit higher up in the sky, and it has that distinctive color, rusty color. And we can also see that Gemini, the twins, is up here, and we can, I'll just put the figures up here so you can see them up there. And so Castor and Pollux are kind of in a line, they're kind of level right there, and Mars is down by their feet down there. So you can see that over in the western part of the sky still. If we look over towards the southwest, we can see that Sirius is still visible, but it's getting to be lower down on the horizon. And so as the winter constellations disappear and Sirius sinks over into the southwest, we can actually start to see that the summer constellations are starting to rise over in the northeast. So there's Vega over in the northeast. So as Sirius sinks, Vega is coming up on the other side. And what you also notice at this time of the year is that the Milky Way is more or less along the horizon. Here we can see it's over in the southwest. And the summer Milky Way, however, is right on the horizon over here. So it's not yet prominent in the sky. And that's something to look forward to. What you can see, however, at this time of the year are, if you have, especially if you have binoculars or a telescope, as you can see a lot of galaxies. And there's some well-known galaxy clusters that are visible up in the sky. And I'll just turn them on just to show their distribution. And you can see the Virgo cluster, for example, right here. Tonight would be if it was clear, it would be a bad night to look because the moon is there. We're 2 days away from the full moon. But in the coming weeks, there'll be lots of galaxies visible. And you can see they're off right up here through Coma Berenices and up through the Big Dipper and so on. But if you look over towards the west, you notice there's not as many galaxies visible over in this area. And similarly, if you're to look over towards the coming, summer sky, there's not as many galaxies there And that's simply because the dust of the Milky Way is blocking our view of them. So springtime is not only for love, it's also a time for galaxies. And so this is a great time to be looking at galaxies. One more thing, something I learned as a child is this little mnemonic for finding a few things in the sky. You can see the Big Dipper up here. I'll just turn the galaxies off for a second because you know how they are, they get kind of distracting. You can see the Big Dipper and you can see the arc of the handle of the Big Dipper. And what I learned is that you can arc down to Arcturus and then spike down to Spica over here, which is actually, and as the evening goes on, it's more or less right underneath Arcturus. So that's an easy way to find a few bright stars in the nighttime sky. And I think that's about all I have to say at the moment. That there is a meteor shower that's coming up on the 5th as well. And so that's the Eta Aquarids, and that you'll see about 10 to 20 meteors per hour. This is a pretty good occurrence of it because the moon doesn't rise until about 4 a.m. So you won't have moonlight blotting it out. So so that's about it for me.
Excellent. Thank you, Don. Okay. So Mars is still visible in our night sky, and there's some cool stuff happening there. As you may have seen in the news recently, the Perseverance rover on Mars is just hitting milestone after milestone. We have achieved the first powered flight on another planet with the Ingenuity helicopter. As well, we've created oxygen for the first time in situ or on Mars, out of the Martian atmosphere. And I'm going to talk about the oxygen part later on if we have time, but I wanted to share the video of the Ingenuity helicopter here. Let me set that up. This one. Okay, so here we've got the Martian surface as seen from Perseverance using its mast camera, the little head on top of the mast on top of the rover. And down here at the bottom, we have the Ingenuity helicopter. So the blades start spinning up and it's able to take off from the surface. Oh, there we go. The blades. And take off. So this first flight lasted about 10 seconds, or 30 seconds rather, and it reached about 10 feet in altitude, did a little turn before dropping back down to this Martian surface. So this is astounding because Mars is really, really, really hard to fly on, mostly because of its very, very thin atmosphere. This poses a big challenge for landing things in general on Mars because, as some NASA engineers say, it's Mars has too little of an atmosphere to be really useful for much, but just enough that you have to take it into account. And this is why the Mars rovers have such an incredible Rube Goldberg type landing system with retro rockets and parachutes all combined just to get the rover to slow down enough. Mars's atmosphere is about 1% the density of Earth's, which means that to have something fly on Mars, it has to push really hard against that tiny amount of air that's there. And one thing that really illustrates this, and I caught in this video that I thought was fascinating, is if you've ever seen like a helicopter take off here on Earth, you don't just see the helicopter lift off. You see its effect everywhere around it. You see the grass rippling in waves. If it's on like sand or something, you see big billows of dust kick off. But take a look at this helicopter, or at the ground around it, rather. As it's spinning up, there's nothing happening on the ground. And Mars is covered in some of the finest, driest dust in the solar system. So this helicopter, to be able to fly, has to push so hard against this air, but it's still barely hard enough to even kick up dust on the Martian surface. Yeah, not much of a dust-off, as Calvin says. So this is an incredible feat of engineering, and they had to send these rotors spinning incredibly fast and have them be incredibly light to get enough thrust for this liftoff. And the Ingenuity lander or helicopter has already completed a second flight this past Thursday. It went up to about 30 feet, I believe. And now, oh, I have to stop sharing the screen there. So it's already had a second flight, and over the next 20 days or so going forward, we're going to see a series of more and more ambitious flights as Ingenuity goes through its paces and really learns a lot about what it's like to fly on Mars. And again, I'll talk a bit more about Perseverance later on as we have time. But now it's time for our feature event. I would like to introduce our speaker tonight, Tim Yaworski. Did I say that correctly, Tim?
You certainly did.
All right, excellent. You can join us on video here. There you are. All right. So Tim is going to be talking to us about imaging the Milky Way. Tim is a professional photographer and videographer from Saskatoon. He was raised in the lower mainland of BC, right near here, and he now enjoys the easy access to the dark and open skies on the Canadian prairies. He's a member of the Royal Astronomical Society of Canada as the in his role as a tech advisor for London Drugs. He's led workshops and community outreach programs for thousands of people over the years. He can be found as Living Sky Guy on YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, sharing his love of photography with an emphasis on astrophotography. Tim, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here with you. To get started off, I want to first off say greetings from the Saskatoon Center of RASC. My fellow members all say hi to you out there. And as you already said, although I'm in Saskatoon, that's not where I started. I actually grew up in the lower mainland. And I just want to share a brief story about my first experience with the DAO, and that's when I was 13 years old. And at that time, I was a member of a small little astronomy group in Maple Ridge, and a few fellows decided they were going to do a day trip to the island and take a look at the observatory. So as this, young, bright, not so bright 13-year-old, I hopped in the back of the car there and I went along with them. And we had a really great time, actually. We had a beautiful tour of the Plaskett telescope and some of the workings behind the scenes and that. And actually, I have two really strong memories from that. The first one was outside one of the workshops was the shipping container for the mirror for the CFH telescope, which at that time was being ground in Victoria. And so they were getting ready to ship it off to Hawaii to install into that scope. So I remember that. And the other thing I remember was we lost track of time. And we arrived at the ferry terminal too late to get the last ferry back to the lower mainland. And of course, this was a time before cell phones or anything like that. And so we basically figured, well, we'll just sleep in the car. And I got absolutely no sleep in the car, worrying what kind of trouble I was going to be in when I got home. Because my parents knew where I was going, but they were, I think, expecting me to arrive back home that night. And sure enough, I think the first ferry headed off about 5 o'clock in the morning, and we were the first ones on and first ones off. And I walked into the front door about 7:30 in the morning, only to realize that my parents hadn't even noticed that I was gone. So I lost all that sleep for nothing. But I had a wonderful experience and some wonderful memories of the DAO. And I look forward to one day being able to tour it again, but this time without having to worry about getting hell from mom and dad. So anyways, I want to thank you very much for inviting me. And what am I here to talk about today is very simple. What I want to talk to you about today is photographing the Milky Way, sort of getting started in astrophotography. And when we talk about astrophotography, the sort of the term that I like to use, the definition is essentially anytime you're pointing your camera at something that is not on this planet, you are doing astrophotography. So whether you're photographing the moon or the Milky Way or a sunset, you're doing astrophotography. So to give you a rough idea about what tonight's all about, it's just literally just an introduction to get people started on it. And to show you a little bit of imagery going above and beyond just the Milky Way, I just want to share this little brief video with you here.
Tim, I think you're still on mute if you muted for the video.
I muted myself. So although the focus of today is the Milky Way, most of the techniques that we're going to be talking about tonight can be carried over to other subjects in the night sky. So what are we going to talk about tonight? Basically, what we're going to be talking about tonight is photographing specifically the Milky Way. And when people think of the Milky Way, generally, well, what I want to sort of the subjects I'm going to be covering this evening are the equipment you're going to need to get started. We're going to talk about how to run that equipment, essentially turning off all the automatic functions on our cameras, and talk a little bit about file formats and what file format is going to work best for the type of stuff that we're doing here. The other thing that we're going to look at is some, I guess, to get started from this here, let's talk about the basic equipment that you need. And the basic equipment you need is not that much. You need either a DSLR or mirrorless camera, essentially any camera that you can change the lens on. It has the ability then to be able to give you the light gathering capability you want. So whether we're talking DSLR or mirrorless cameras, as long as you can change the lens on it, that's a good place to start right there. Then, of course, a lens, and they almost all of them come out of the box with that basic kit lens. If it's something like a crop sensor camera, it's usually in that range of 18 to 55. If it's full frame, something like a 28 to 70, you can get started with that kit lens quite nicely. The next thing you're going to want to look at is getting a good quality stable tripod. We're talking about exposures that we are going to be reading in seconds as opposed to fractions of a second. So stability is the important thing. And then the next thing we want to be looking at is a way of tripping that camera's shutter without touching the camera, because of the fact that no matter how stable a tripod you have, it can be absolutely rock solid. Just the simple act of pushing that shutter button will create some movement on the camera and won't help you with the sharpness of your images. So tripping the camera can be as simple as using a wired cable release like I'm showing here in the image. You can get some wireless cable releases, wireless triggers for some cameras. I do recommend going with the cable ones. They are a little more reliable. And the other simple solution is already built into every camera, which is a self-timer. Cameras have self-timers that allow you anywhere from a 2 to a 10-second delay from when you push the button to when it actually takes the exposure. And that's, I guess, the already included way of tripping the camera without worrying about camera shake. By choosing that 2-second delay, by the time you push the shutter button and the shutter itself opens, any sort of movement should have been absorbed by the camera and tripod. The other piece of equipment you're going to want to get is a red flashlight, whether we're talking a handheld flashlight or something like that headband style, that'll allow you to check your camera settings, make adjustments without having to turn on a white light, because of course white light is going to mess up your night vision. When you go out to a dark sky area, usually within about 15 to 20 minutes, your eyes get used to the darkness and you're using areas of the eyes that are not being used in the daytime. And that's why when we go to a dark sky, we first look initially we look up and we see, wow, there's more stars than I see in my backyard. But 15, 20 minutes later, we're seeing even more stars. But heaven forbid, let's say you dropped your keys in the long grass when you reach into your pocket for something, and all of a sudden you're worrying about trying to find your keys. If you turn on a white flashlight or the flashlight on your cell phone, you're resetting your night vision, and you're basically going to totally mess up your night vision once again. So, which means you're going to have to wait another 20 minutes to be able to get it back again. But by utilizing the red light is not going to affect your night vision as long as you're not shining it directly into your own eyes. And also take caution if you're out shooting with other people, don't shine it towards them as well. So that's the basic equipment to get started. Now, the other sort of optional things, which we'll touch on a little bit, some specialized lenses going over and above the kit lens. And I'll talk a little bit about what they can do for you. If you've got a smartphone or a tablet, there are a lot of great apps out there, whether you're looking at something like Stellarium or Sky Safari or anything like that. Myself, the one I'm talking about on here is Celestron Sky Portal, which is a sort of a Celestron branded version of Sky Safari. The reason I talk about that one is if people are just getting started in this, sometimes they don't want to spend a lot of money on it just in case it's not what they wanted to do. The nice thing about Sky Portal is it's a sort of a licensed version of Sky Safari, sort of Sky Safari Lite that Celestron offers for both iOS and Android as a free download. So you can download this one for free, and if you really like it, you can spend the money to get the more robust version, whether we're talking Stellarium or Sky Safari. The Moon app, basically, there's thousands of, probably hundreds of free Moon apps out there that you can load onto your devices. And the main reason for them is just to be able to keep track of the phases of the moon and what the position of the moon, because that's going to help you when you're planning your observing and planning your shooting. And for me, the apps like Sky Portal or Stellarium, I find them invaluable for when you're actually planning your shooting sessions. The thing about stars is they move throughout different areas of the sky at different seasons. And if you're planning, for example, a shot to have the Milky Way over a specific area of the sky that you're interested in, you can actually dial in your longitude, your latitude, your time, your date. You can plan your vacations around when the Milky Way is going to be where you want it to be, things like that. So that's where the apps really come in handy. The other thing, which would be falling into the category of something nice to have, is an interval timer. A lot of cameras have interval timers on them. that will allow you to basically automate the process of telling the camera to take one image after another image after another image. And why would you want to do that? The main reason you want to do that is if you're doing something like a time lapse, or you're doing photographing a meteor shower, or if you're photographing star trails where you need an image after an image after an image. Instead of basically standing there and tripping the shutter every 30 seconds, by setting the interval timer up, you can tell the camera, I want to take 60 images, 30 seconds long, one after another after another. And it makes your job just so much simpler. It also gives you more time to sit back while the camera is doing some work and enjoy the beauty of the night sky. Now, if your camera does not have an interval timer, don't worry. You can also get external interval timers, and one like this one here is available for most major brands of cameras, and this one online you can generally find for somewhere in about the $40 range, and it will allow you to do actually even more than the camera's internal interval timer will do. Then the last sort of two pieces of equipment that fall into the category of optional or nice to have are, oh, I jumped ahead one slide, 1 second here. Don't mind me. There we are. These little zap straps or little bungee cords and hand warmers, those sort of single-use hand warmers. And they're not for your hands, they're for keeping your hands warm. What they're designed to do is to help keep your lens warm. The thing about astrophotography is when you're shooting out at night, whether it's winter, spring, summer, or fall, we're always dealing with things like changes in temperature or changes in humidity. In the summertime, the biggest problem we have is dew, moisture rising up from the ground at nighttime, which will eventually settle in on your lenses. In the wintertime out here in Saskatchewan, if I'm going out when it's minus 40 out, the biggest problem I have is my lenses freezing over. And the nice thing about these little chemical hand warmers are, you give that thing a shake, you wrap it around the lens barrel, just like I'm showing in that picture there, hold it in place with one of those little bungees, and it generates just enough warmth to be able to keep the lens elements themselves warm throughout the night. Those packs are usually good for about 4 hours. So you get enough gentle warmth on there to keep the elements warm without creating things like heat waves and that sort of stuff. This is sort of the low-tech version of those electrical dew heaters that astronomers use. So that's sort of the total of the equipment that you're looking at. Going back sort of as a refresher, camera, lens, tripod, and some way of triggering it is the minimum to get started. And you can do some amazing things with just those 4 pieces of equipment. So let's take a look at the next step here. And the next step is taking our cameras off-road. Now, what do I mean by off-road? Our cameras come out of the factory preset to be fully automatic. Everything out of the box is automatic because the manufacturer wants to make sure that when you take that very expensive camera out of the box, you're starting to get really good photographs to start with. And that's why everything is set to automatic. And that works great until the sun goes down. And when we're dealing with astrophotography, automatic ain't gonna cut it for you. So when we're talking about manual, we're going to talk about manual in a few different things. The first thing we're going to talk about is manual exposure control. That P mode on top of your camera standing for program, it's not going to do you any good. You're going into full manual control. And by full manual control of exposure, what we're talking about is manually controlling your shutter speed and manually controlling your aperture. And where you set the shutter speed is going to depend on a few different variables, depending on your own camera, the darkness of the sky that you're in, and the subject matter that you're shooting. And tonight we're kind of focusing on, well, as I say, the Milky Way. So think of those longer exposure times, where we're thinking of exposure times anywhere from about 20 to 30 seconds long. when it comes to aperture, we're going to be going to generally speaking, to get started at the widest aperture that your lens can shoot at. And in most cases with your average kit lens, when you're at the wide angle position, that's usually an aperture of about somewhere around f3.5. So think of f3.5, think of 20 to 30 seconds of exposure time. So that's our first off-road experience, manual exposure. The next thing is manual focusing. Our cameras come out of the factory preset for automatic focus, but if you try to automatic focus on a dark sky, all that the camera is going to do is going to go zip, 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 zip back and forth, trying to find something of enough contrast to be able to focus on. And those tiny pinpoint stars ain't going to cut it. So what that means is we're going to be going into manual focus control and manually setting our focus to infinity, so that basically at infinity, anything from about 40 feet to infinity, the edge of the viewable universe will be in focus. And so that's where we're worrying about that. So we're not having to worry about that automatic focusing. We're going to make sure we put our camera into manual focus and infinity. The next manual control is our ISO, or the sensitivity of the camera. And once again, out of the factory, it's always preset to automatic ISO. You're going to be manually controlling your ISO. And once again, how high you're setting that ISO is really going to depend on the subject that you're shooting. And that's going to vary depending on the subject. If you're shooting something like the moon, you're not going at a very high ISOs. But if you're shooting the Milky Way, you're going to be going up there anywhere from 1600, 3200, 5000, depending on your camera and also depending on where you're shooting. The darker the sky you're in, the better you can get away with going up to some higher ISOs, because you're not worrying too much about light pollution. So think of, for the most part, with my cameras, which are all crop sensor cameras, I spend most of my time at 3200 ISO. Now, the one thing that people always sort of ask me about, well, 3200 ISO, that's pretty high. Aren't you going to get grainy photographs? Well, no, not necessarily. In the world of film, back in the days of film, if anyone out there ever shot some of that old 3200 ISO film, yeah, it looked horrible. It looked like sand pictures. But digital is much more forgiving. And so the other people say, well, sometimes people will say, well, if you go to 3200, you can't make big prints. Well, yes, you can. In fact, right behind me, just over my shoulder here, I'm not showing you the whole image here, but there's an image there of the Milky Way, which is actually printed 44 by 66 inches. And that's taken at 3200 ISO with a crop sensor camera. And even at this close of a distance, when it's sitting just over my shoulder, the view of the Milky Way is absolutely breathtaking, and it's not looking like a sand picture for sure. So after we've set our manual ISO, the other thing I want to talk about is a feature that's built into our cameras, or into a lot of cameras, called long exposure noise reduction. And a lot of people don't necessarily know this feature is built into their camera, and sometimes it can surprise them. If you're shooting something like the Milky Way, and you're just basically going to get that image of the Milky Way, not shooting one image after another, after another, after another, definitely leave long exposure noise reduction turned on. Now, what's unusual about long exposure noise reduction, though, is, which sort of freaks people out the first time, is they go to take a 30-second exposure, and then all of a sudden their camera appears to lock up for 30 seconds and won't let them do anything, won't even show them the image they just took. Well, what's going on with my camera? What's happening? Well, what long exposure noise reduction does is, when you take that 30-second exposure, at the end of that image, it then runs electricity through the sensor one more time for 30 seconds, not actually taking a photograph, but just heating up the sensor. And then what it's doing is it's looking at what noise has been generated in that sensor, and it takes that noise and compares it to the noise on that image you just took, and does its best to try to eliminate that noise. So that's what long exposure noise reduction is doing. Now, it sounds like a great idea, and it is if you're just taking a single image. But if you want to do something like if you're shooting a time lapse, or if you're shooting star trails, or you're taking pictures during a meteor shower, and you want to take one image after another, after another, after another, if you leave this feature turned on your camera, what's going to happen is you're going to have images that are taken 30 seconds apart while it's doing its long exposure noise reduction, which means you're not going to have a very good looking time lapse. You're going to have horrible looking star trails, and you're probably going to be missing all the meteors that are going through the frame during the time the camera is not taking the photograph. So for single images of the Milky Way, or even if you're stacking images, taking multiple images and sort of putting them over top of each other, yes, you can leave long exposure noise reduction on. Just know what it's doing and why it's there. And the other automatic feature that you're going to be turning off on your camera is image stabilization. If your camera has either in-body image stabilization or your lenses have a form of stabilization, sometimes they'll call it OIS or they'll call it VR if you're a Nikon user, you want to turn that feature off. Now, image stabilization, what it's designed to do is to help soften out camera movement when you're hand holding the camera. Well, when you're on a tripod, you're not hand holding the camera. You are on a nice, solid, stable platform. And by leaving image stabilization turned on, you're actually denigrating the quality of your images. And I know it sounds counterintuitive. Something that's supposed to give me better pictures is give me worse pictures when it's turned on. Yes, if you're on a tripod, because what image stabilization does, whether it's in camera or in the lens, it's shifting something. In the camera, it's shifting the image sensor. In the lens, it's actually shifting a lens element to help counteract that movement when you're hand holding. But if the camera's rock solid on a tripod, it's kind of like that 4-year-old who you say, you know, quit running around the house. I want you to sit still on the couch for the next 5 minutes. And during that timeout, what's that kid doing? He's fidgeting. He's fidgeting because I got to be doing something. I got to be doing something. I got to be doing something. And that's what image stabilization is doing. When it's sitting in a tripod, it's ever so slightly waiting to jump into action, and it's messing up the quality of your images. So turn it off. You'll have a bonus as well, using less battery power and not having to, you'll be able to extend your shooting session throughout the night. So that's your basic settings. Now, the last setting that I want to talk about is the file format that you're choosing. When we get our cameras, once again, out of the box, they have them preset for shooting JPEG images. And JPEG images, the reason that they're shooting JPEG images is JPEG images are a compressed file. They were the camera's doing all the thinking for you. The camera's determining what's the color balance or what white balance am I at? What's the shadow detail? What's all of those little fine points are on there and locked into place. Now, the reason JPEG images were a thing was to make photography a little simpler for people, but also create smaller file sizes for them. And back in the day when memory was expensive, I can remember when we opened our store here in 2002, we had our very first 1 gigabyte memory card. And this 1 gigabyte memory card was amazing. I remember saying, oh my God, 1 gig, that's absolutely huge. And the cost of that 1 gigabyte card in 2002 was $1,599. So as you can imagine, when you were spending that kind of money on memory, you didn't want to fill it up too quickly. So that's one of the reasons why JPEG was a thing. But the downside to JPEG is, of course, it's letting the camera do all the thinking for you, and you don't have a lot of creative controls with your images after the fact. So the opposite of JPEG are raw images. Now, raw images are much larger file sizes. For the most part, you're going to find them usually in the range of about 10 times the size of a JPEG file. But the reason they're so large is they're recording way more information, even information that you're not seeing, so that after the fact, in post-production, you've got the ability to be able to pull out a lot more detail. And what the difference is can be best illustrated in this image here. So here's an image that was taken one August, just before midnight, just as the moon was setting, over a beautiful prairie sky here. And right up in the center, you can see a little hint of the Milky Way. Now, this was a 30-second exposure taken at 3200 ISO with a 12 millimeter lens at f2. Now, the first thing you'll notice about the sky is the sky doesn't really look like a night sky at all. It's kind of got sort of a bit of a cast to it, and it's kind of got a grayish look. And the Milky Way, although it's there, it's not exactly stellar, pardon the pun. And the foreground is very muddy as well. You really can't see a lot of what's going on in the foreground. Now, this is what a JPEG image is going to do for you. And you really can't pull out much more detail out of that image at this point because the JPEG is pretty much locked in. There's no more hidden information. But when you have the raw file out of the camera is going to look probably even worse than this. A lot flatter looking, a lot less contrasty. But the beauty of the raw file is that you can then go in there and pull out some details. You can work on things like highlights. You can work on shadow detail. You can make your night sky look more like a night sky. You can make your Milky Way look more like a Milky Way, pulling up more detail in the dust clouds, or even in the foreground, that field of canola. You can bring out that detail in it as well. And that's the beauty of shooting raw. Now, what it does mean, of course, is you're going to be spending more time in post-production, but it's far worth it for the advantages that you're getting. So on that note, those are the main settings. So let's talk a little bit about what we're going to be shooting. So what are we shooting and when are we going to be shooting it? So the first thing, like I say, tonight, our topic is the Milky Way. And when people think the Milky Way, they generally think of something like this. This is an image that I took a couple of summers ago at grasslands in southern Saskatchewan. So they're thinking of this beautiful, beautiful river of stars as it's rising up in the night sky. And the Milky Way is a wonderful subject to shoot as long as you're shooting it at the right time of the year. And when's the right time of the year? Well, the right time of the year is Milky Way season. And when's Milky Way season? Generally speaking, from early March to late September is your prime time for photographing the Milky Way. Now, why does the Milky Way have a season? I always thought, people say, well, I thought the Milky Way is always visible. Well, yes, the Milky Way is visible 365 days of the year, as long as the sky is clear. But what we're seeing in the Milky Way is what makes the difference between Milky Way season and not. Looking down, if we were looking down on our solar system or on our galaxy in the Milky Way, there's our place in the universe there, or in our galaxy. Now, during the winter months, our Earth is looking towards the outer arms of the Milky Way, to the area that doesn't have as much population of stars. So in the winter months, when you go where it's dark, you'll see a faint looking Milky Way. But the summertime or Milky Way season, that late March to late September, that's when we're looking more towards the galactic core. And this is definitely not to scale. This is more of an exaggeration from my viewpoint, but we're looking more towards the center or the galactic core. And the advantage of looking towards the galactic core is we're looking towards where there are more stars. Now, there are different times of the year throughout Milky Way season where you're going to see it at different in different areas of the sky. So for example, right now at about this time of the year, we're seeing the Milky Way at its best just in those hours preceding sunrise. So means for me here in Saskatoon, I'm getting up at about 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning and heading out to be able to view the Milky Way. But as the summer progresses and the sky is changing more towards that summer sky, that's when you're going to see, for example, this is an August view of the Milky Way. in this case, taken right around 11 o'clock at night, where that Milky Way is rising straight up from the southern sky. But whether you're going early in the year or summertime or late into the season, the Milky Way never ceases to amaze. Some of my best images when I'm talking about wide field astrophotography are in capturing the beauty of the Milky Way. This particular shot's actually a little bit different than what we're talking about tonight. Tonight, we're talking about sort of 30-second exposures on the Milky Way. This particular one is a 5-minute exposure taken with the camera on a tracking mount that will allow the camera to basically follow with the rotation of the Earth. So I could go, in this case, to a lower ISO. This particular shot was taken at 800 ISO for 5 minutes, where if you look closely at the foreground where the Earth is, you'll see some blurring in the foreground. The goal for this particular shot was actually to capture two things: the galactic core of the Milky Way, but that streak that's going down the center of it is the International Space Station. That's 5 minutes of the ISS as it was flying across Saskatchewan. This is one of the advantages of having, for example, apps on your phone, not only being able to tell you where the Milky Way is, but also tell you where the ISS is going to be and what area of the sky it is. And using two of those apps, I was able to plan this particular shot about 3 months in advance. But as you can see, the Milky Way has so much to offer and so much beauty. And especially if you incorporate it, this shot doesn't do it as justice. I like to incorporate more of the foreground in there. Find something very interesting, something on the Earth that can sort of tie the sky to the Earth, and it helps your viewers themselves as well to tie together their conception. So the Milky Way. When's the best time to be viewing the Milky Way? Once again, best results are always going to be on a moonless night. You want to go when you've got dark skies. And the best way to do that is get out of town. And I live in Saskatoon, not nearly as large a metropolis as you folks have, but as you can see, my night sky here, this shot of Orion is a 30-second exposure taken in my front yard, and definitely not a great shot. But the same constellation taken the next day, 40 minutes out of town, both of those are 30-second exposures. You can see the advantages and the beauty of going to that dark sky. But also make sure you're going and waiting for it to get dark. In the summertime especially, don't think of being able to do any shooting until probably about 1.5 to 2 hours after sunset. Although, because even something like this to the naked eye looked like a dark sky, but in 30 seconds, you can see it almost looks like a dusk or dawn type sky. So the tips for shooting the Milky Way: shoot in Milky Way season, look for that moonless night, get out of town where the skies are dark, think of the higher ISOs, think of shutter speeds anywhere from 20 to 30 seconds, widest aperture on your lens, and your widest angle on your lens. If you've got that 18 to 55, put it at 18. If you've got a 24 to 70, put it at 24. And of course, lastly, wait until it's dark. Now, briefly, I just want to touch on what a few lenses can do for you. I'm sort of conscious of my time here, of your time as well. So the kit lens itself, as we've just shown you, the kit lens, it works at its best at its wide angle setting. It'll give you your sharpest stars at the wide angle, less chance of seeing any of the magnifying the motion of the Earth as well. And you'll also usually get your best light gathering capability. The kit lens will always be fastest at the wide angle position. So this is an example of the Milky Way taken with a kit lens at f3.5. Now, next step up would be an ultra wide lens. In this case, if you've got a crop sensor camera, this is an example of a 12mm lens. Because it's a prime lens, first off, it's going to give you faster apertures to allow you to gather more light in there. You'll also, because it's a wider field of view, you can go to longer shutter speeds, somewhere in the area of 30 seconds, without necessarily capturing that motion of the Earth. And the advantage you're going to see with that is, first off, more of the Milky Way in your shots and more detail of the Milky Way in your shots. More details in things like the dust cloud in those brighter areas. A fisheye lens is kind of specialized, extreme wide field of view so that you can get a lot more sky in, but they have a real disadvantage of barrel distortion. This is an example of the Milky Way taken with a 8mm full frame fisheye, and although the sky looks okay, the foreground kind of looks like it came out of a Dr. Seuss book. If I'm shooting fisheye, most of the time, actually, I'm going to use my circular fisheye, and that's what I want to be able to capture more of what's going on in the sky. And in this case, aside from that Milky Way, also capturing some beautiful aurora that was happening that night. And it gives you more of a creative and artistic look. It's not necessarily a natural look, but it's a different look as well. And the last lens we're going to talk about is your 50mm, your nifty 50, that basic prime lens. Now, the advantage of the prime lenses, they're generally very fast, f1.4, f1.8, so you can gather even more light. They're going to give you a narrower field of view, though. So in this case, shooting the Milky Way with a 50mm lens, instead of seeing all the stuff around it, you're looking more at some of the detail areas. In this case, something like the North American Nebula. But generally speaking, because they've got such a narrow field of view, you're going to run the risk of star trailing. Your stars not looking like stars, but starting to streak on you. So this one generally is going to be best if you're going on to a tracking mount. But in just a quick recap here, there's your kit lens. There's the 12mm wide angle lens. There is the fisheye. And there's the 50mm lens. And what I find for my own use, that 12mm lens is my sort of go-to lens. If you're shooting a full frame, that'd be about an 18mm lens. And the advantage you're going to see with that is you're going to get less detail. You're going to get more details in your Milky Way, wider field of view as well. I'm sorry, was there a question out there?
No, I think we're good for now.
Okay, and the last thing I want to touch on is post-production. Now, we talked about, shooting in RAW. Now, the problem with RAW is those RAW files do not look great straight out of the camera. Now, there's lots of different software out there. For people who are really heavy into astrophotography, they're going to use something like PixInsight. But for the average person, most people are looking at something like Photoshop. And for me, Photoshop is my main sort of go-to piece of software. And processing your images in post-production, there's lots of different recipes out there. And I'll share with you my favorite recipe for doing a Milky Way shot. If you just go to my YouTube channel under Living Sky Guy, look for Milky Way the easy way, and I've got a little 5-minute tutorial on how to draw out those raw files and to really make them pop out and sing. And on that happy note, I'm sorry I've gone probably about 5 minutes beyond my time here. If you got any questions, great. And if you think of questions later, please reach out to me.
All right, thank you so much, Tim. And yeah, we do actually have a couple of questions that have already popped up in the chat. So let me take a look for those. Bill Kellett actually has a few. I'll do one or two of his and then move on to some of the other ones we've seen. He has a Fujifilm X-T1 converted to infrared imaging. Will infrared images differ from those taken with a visible light camera?
I imagine they would, because it's seeing a completely different color spectrum, and I have absolutely no experience shooting with infrared. So I'd be curious to see what they do look like. And yes, Bill, I'm looking forward to you sharing some of those images with me.
Mm-hmm. I know infrared can pick out, or it can see through a lot more of the dust. you may not see as much of the nebulosity as you would in the normal Milky Way shot, but it may pick up a lot more of the fainter stars, which are brighter in infrared than they are in visible light. So you might see some brown dwarfs or red dwarfs in there.
Okay.
And depending on the type of infrared modification, you can usually just make up with it by putting a filter in front of the lens to avoid some of the IR bloat you usually get with, you know, something that's a little bit older and has a bit of a heat map on different areas of the sensor if you're shooting at full spectrum without that UV IR cut filter in front.
Okay.
Okay, good to know. Thank you, Dan. All right. And then he also asks, so the Milky Way season will be 6 months later in the Southern Hemisphere, is that right? Just sort of for clarification, is that Milky Way season all over the Earth, or is it just up here in the Northern Hemisphere?
That's primarily the Northern Hemisphere. The Southern Hemisphere, actually, they get a pretty decent view of the Milky Way a lot longer than we do. When I see images from Australia, New Zealand, anywhere in that Southern Hemisphere, just absolutely gorgeous. They're seeing an even greater view than we are for a longer period of time.
Mm-hmm. But during the same part of the year that we can't see the core, because it's well, we don't see it for about 6 months because it's below the horizon, right? But
yeah,
for them, they would see it go behind the sun for some part of the year as well, right?
They would,
right near the equator. Okay.
Yeah.
So their Milky Way off season, I guess, would be shorter than ours, but they'd still have one.
They will still have one. Yeah.
Cool. Let's see, what else have we got here? Calvin asks, how does a lens type affect the exposure time?
Generally speaking, yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, the wider angle lens that you have, the longer the shutter speed you can go to and not worry about star trailing. That's why, for example, if you're using a crop sensor camera with, say, an 18 millimeter lens, generally speaking, most people try to stay about 20 to 25 seconds, no more than that. Otherwise, you're going to start to see star trailing. However, though, if you're using something like a 12 millimeter lens, you can go to 30 seconds and still have stars that are looking like stars. Basically, the wider the field of view, the less noticeable the Earth's rotation is going to be. And that's why something like the 50 millimeter lens, although if you go to a very short shutter speed, somewhere in the area of about 10 to 15 seconds, you can generally get away without star trailing. I try not to do that. If I'm going to do anything up to 30 seconds, if it's not my 12 millimeter, I'm going to go onto a tracking mount. Otherwise, I'm not going to have pinpoint looking stars. And even with the 12 millimeter lens, if I really zoom in and pixel peep on it, I will see a slight amount of trailing, but generally not enough that the viewer is going to notice. But I guess, so the answer to the question, the wider the field of view you got, the longer the shutter speed you can go. That's why I say that sort of 20 to 30 second range is kind of the sweet spot to look at for the Milky Way.
Okay, and so I guess he asked a follow-up question. So I guess the star trailing would be why you can't leave the sensor exposed for any arbitrary length of time. You just get, okay. And that's something you could overcome with a tracking mount?
With a tracking mount, yeah. Like with the tracking mount, whether it's something like this telescope behind me or one of the small portable ones, as long as you're polar aligned, you can go and, do 5 or 10 minute exposures and have something that still looks like stars. Like that, like this Milky Way shot right over here, which is a 5 minute exposure, but the stars look like stars.
Gotcha. All right, let's see. I think we had someone follow up for the Galaxy one. So it would be sort of like the Galaxy off season rather than, sorry, it's been sent to a different chat here. One moment. Oh, so Jacob asks, would you call it just Milky Way season or core Milky Way season?
Oh, well. I guess, well, all year round is Milky Way season, but if what you're looking for is that really sort of impressive galactic core, then yeah, if you wanted, I guess, you could call it the Milky Way galactic core season. Generally speaking, the term people use though is sort of Milky Way season.
Okay. Let's see. Another question from Bill. How do the hundreds of SpaceX satellites that are up there now, or the other satellite swarms, affect your photography?
Horribly, but not all the time, thank God. Generally, the thing about them is what I see, at least in my neck of the woods, is they're most noticeable when they're flying overhead early in the evening and very late in the evening, just prior to sunrise. Most of that time, they're sort of in the shadows and not really affecting. However, I've seen, and I'm sure any one of us who was out there done anything with photography has had some beautiful shots ruined by them. I guess my worst experience was not long after one of the early launches, and there was a train that I was out at the Sleaford Observatory about 45 minutes out of town. It was about an hour after sunset, so not really dark yet, but I wanted to get sort of a time lapse of the darkening sky, and a train went overhead of these satellites, and it lasted 15 minutes before they cleared the sky. So it's and it's a complicated issue. You know, there's lots of good to come from these, but it's the way it's affecting astronomy, specifically astrophotography, is kind of a little disconcerting. But I also have a feeling that we're going to see more and more, as more and more of these go up, you're going to start seeing, just like there's filters for Photoshop for lots of other different things, it's only a matter of time before someone invents a Starlink filter that's going to automatically wipe them out of our images, but who knows?
Yeah.
And just to add on to that, you can get past it by stacking, which is one of the main ways that amateurs are able to evade it, is that if you're not taking a single frame, you're able to reject them and have them cut out in the noise.
Yeah. Let's see. Les asks, hi Tim, when moving away from the starting manual settings, why would you consider changing the ISO rather than the exposure time or aperture? So you've explained the exposure time in terms of star trails, but why ISO rather than aperture?
Well, once again, we're going to the longer shutter speeds. We're going to the widest aperture we can, but that in the exposure triangle, we've basically got three things. We've got shutter speed, we've got aperture, we've got ISO. And for me to, if for example, I wanted to keep my ISO at a lower ISO, say I want to keep it at 400 ISO instead of 3200, but I'm want to have enough light to be able to capture the stars. Now that 30-second exposure at 3200 ISO, if I go to 400 ISO, is going to be now minutes long, probably somewhere in the area. And I'm just spitballing the math here. Let's say we're talking about a 3 or 4 minute exposure instead of a 30-second exposure, which means, like, for example, going back to the shot over my shoulder, that one I was able to do at 800 ISO because I was going for 5 minutes long because I was on a tracking mount. But if I'm not on a tracking mount and I do at 4 minute exposure, I'm not going to have stars that look like stars. I'm going to have long streaks of the stars. So yes, you can go to a wider aperture, you can go to a longer shutter speed, but there's a certain point where you're going to have to boost up the sensitivity of the sensor to be able to capture those stars. So that's the three are interrelated. Those three variables are interrelated. And for astrophotography, higher ISOs, unless you're shooting something like the moon or aurora, you can sometimes keep the ISO down lower, but for the Milky Way, it's going to be up there.
Okay. Let's see. Niels asks, do you expose quote unquote normally, or do you purposely overexpose to some degree?
It's going to depend on what I'm shooting. Okay, so for example, if I'm shooting the Milky Way and I just want a single frame image, just a single frame image, as opposed to stacking, okay, I'm generally going to overexpose a little bit so that my sky doesn't, in the camera, I don't necessarily want my sky to look black. I want my sky to have a bit of almost like a grayishness in it, so that after the fact, when I take that raw image into Photoshop or Lightroom, I've got the ability to make adjustments, so I can increase the blackness of my sky, bring up the details in the stars or in the dust clouds. And if I'm exposing in the camera for a black sky, I'm not getting as much detail in those fainter stars. So yeah, I'll have a tendency of overexposing it slightly, but not to the point of where I'm going to be blowing out my highlights. If you're looking at your histogram, basically, if you've got a histogram on that image, what you want is to have pretty much a flat histogram, except for a spike somewhere in the sort of the right third, I'm sorry, left third, where you're getting some information in that left third, but the whites and blacks are, the true whites and blacks are going to be fairly flat.
Okay, so you're sort of maximizing the amount of contrast you can pull out of that image by capturing the full range of brightnesses in the sky.
Exactly, yeah. I guess the term that some people use is on the histogram, exposed to the left. Essentially, you want your spike to that left-hand side, but not to the extreme left.
Okay. Let's see. Got some more technical questions if you're up for them.
Sure, I'll try.
Jacob asks, what's your take on the 500 rule versus NPF rule when not using a tracker? Now, I have no idea what either of those are. So if you can elaborate what those rules are, that would be fantastic.
I'm not familiar with the NPF rule. I'm not familiar
Okay.
with the NPF rule. The 500 rule, I'm a little familiar with, but generally speaking, a lot of people sort of swear by the 500 rule. Jacob, are you online or are you on YouTube?
I think he's on YouTube. So if he comments here, I'm sure Amy can pass that along to me.
I'm not familiar with the NPF rule, but a lot of people will go by the 500 rule. I know myself, I've sort of gotten to the point where I know how long I can push my lenses. So I stopped doing that math years ago.
So for clarity, what is the 500 rule there?
The 500 rule basically is looking at where they're talking about essentially your what your focal length is and your shutter speed, and I completely forget what the formula was, but essentially it's got to do with your focal length dividing into the shutter speed and dividing or multiplying to the point where, as long as you do not, I'm gonna screw this up. Do not exceed, I guess, 500
divided
as a
by
total.
focal length.
I'm sorry?
David says it's 500 divided by focal length.
Okay, there we are. And so 500 divided by your focal length, and that will tell you the longest shutter speed that you can do. Thank you, David.
Yeah. Yeah, and David is one of our astrophotography experts in the Victoria RASC.
Yeah.
Oh, and Ben has shared something on the NPF rule. Okay, looks like it's something by, oh, it is oh boy, okay, 35 times aperture plus 30 times the pixel pitch divided by focal length is the shutter speed in seconds.
Wow, that's a lot of math.
Yeah. So.
Okay, so in answer to that question, I would go with the 500 rule. That's one equation.
Yeah, so I guess these are just sort of heuristics or rules of thumb for, I guess, getting close to the optimum for any given setup.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. Calvin asks, what are the reasons to not use a tracking mount if you already own one? Just for simplicity of setup, or are there actually situations where you wouldn't want a tracking mount?
A lot of it really would come down to simplicity of setup, I guess. If I'm going to, or the other thing is, if I want to, for example, not have, if I want to have a foreground, if my terrestrial foreground, I want it to look sharp, ideally, if I'm just doing a single image, I'm not going to want to use a tracking mount, because if I'm doing something like say a 1 minute exposure with a tracking mount on it, I'm going to get a blur on the foreground because it's looking like it's stationary, I guess. But what a lot of photographers will do instead is, if they want to have a longer exposure in the stars but have a foreground that still looks sharp, they'll usually take two images, one tracked and one untracked, and then layer the two together in Photoshop. But I guess the real advantage of not using a tracking mount is the simplicity of grab a camera, put it on the tripod, and away you go, as opposed to not worrying about things like polar alignment and that sort of thing. But.
Right. Okay. Let's see. I think. Oh yeah, one more question again from Bill. With any of your setups, like how many batteries would you go through in one evening of shooting? Like if you were planning to be out there all night, how many backups would you bring?
That's a good question. And a lot of that's going to depend on the camera that you're using. Now, Bill, I know for a fact, like me as a Fuji shooter, if you're shooting mirrorless, you're carrying pockets full of batteries with you. Mirrorless cameras go through batteries substantially faster for a couple of reasons. A, they're more heavily reliant on things like electronic viewfinders, as opposed to a DSLR. If you're shooting something like a Canon or a Nikon DSLR, you can shut off those screens, and they generally have a tendency of also having larger capacity batteries. With my Fujis, the battery, it's limited to one size. And if I'm going out for a night, I'm generally going to go out with about, I follow the rule my wife calls it Irish insurance. Prepare for the worst and it won't happen. So for me, I usually go out with about 8 to 10 batteries fully charged.
Oh, wow.
And I'll use maybe 4 of them throughout the night. Okay. If the weather's cold, if it's wintertime and it's minus 20, minus 30, which is not unusual out here, I'll be lucky if I'll get a half an hour out of a battery. And then I'll be popping in a fresh one. But generally speaking, on summertime, I'll be carrying less batteries than I will in the wintertime. But when I go out, I'm usually going to go out with about 2 or 3 cameras. So I'll usually have anywhere up to about a dozen batteries with me. And usually I can make it through the night without having to dip into all of them. But if I was shooting a DSLRs, yeah, you can get a lot longer run time on those. And actually, Sony's got a couple of new mirrorless cameras out there, which are talking about really good long battery life on them. But yeah, no, mirrorless cameras, you're going to carry a lot more with
you. Yeah. David suggests as well, like some cameras have a dummy battery you can get that you can power from a larger external battery as well.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, well, one of my bodies has the ability where I can plug essentially through the USB-C. Through the USB, I should say, I can plug an external battery pack into it. One of those sort of 20,000 milliamp batteries, and that works quite fine as well. And yeah, you can get some look. It basically looks like a battery that plugs in there and it has a little tail hanging out. Then you just plug it into a power supply.
Oh, cool. I actually have a question as well. You mentioned it gets quite cold out there in Saskatchewan. How do you stay warm during these nights? Do you bring your car with you and stay bundled up in there, or what do you bring
Generally
along?
speaking, I try not to go in the car as much as possible, only because of the fact that to me, half of the experience is to be out there in the night, listening to the owls and the coyotes and the crackling of the ice off in the distance and that. So the trick to there is to literally dress for it. And so if I'm going to go out on one of those sort of -30 nights, I've usually got 2 pairs of gloves on it. I've got my sort of one light sort of finger type gloves that will allow me to make controls on it, but I'll also put on a set of really thick and heavy downfill type gloves over top of those. I'll have a full body skidoo suit. I'll have a sweater and jacket on. I'm sorry, a sweater on under that. Plus, I'll put a jacket over top of the skidoo suit. The boots that I wear, I put those hand warmers or foot warmers into those, and the boots themselves are good to about -102 Celsius. And as long as you're just moving around and that, you're generally you can dress for just about anything. But the biggest problem that I have when it gets that cold and you start covering your head, your face, the whole 9 yards, is keeping your glasses from steaming up.
Yeah, it's bad enough in Victoria. I could not even imagine. Might need like a little those little heating packs, like cut them down really small and just put them on either side.
Yes,
Clip them to your
exactly.
glasses.
Exactly. Yeah.
Oh, we have one more question from Jacob. Last question, Tim. Is there a value in taking, say, 6 or 7 images with a tracker, longer exposure, and then take a few? Oh, let's see. Sorry. I guess, is there value in taking like multiple images with a tracker and then stacking them together rather than doing one long exposure there? If you have that tracking ability.
Yeah, and what you will generally find is by stacking images, even if you're using a tracker, by stacking images, you're going to reduce your digital noise. For example, by running a 5-minute exposure, one single 5-minute exposure, as your sensor is heating up over that 5 minutes, you're going to start seeing more and more noise created within the sensor. Now, by stacking, you can go to a shorter exposure time. Say, you could do a series of 1-minute exposures and then stack them together and get the same effect of the 5-minute exposure, but you're going to see a lot less digital noise in it. Stacking is definitely preferred to just trying to stretch that exposure out long.
Okay, and as Dan said, you can probably get rid of any satellites that pop up in 1 or 2 of those images as well that way.
Exactly, that's right. Yeah.
Excellent. Jacob also says, thanks, Tim. Looking forward to going shooting with you again.
Excellent.
All right. So I believe those are all the questions we have from the chat and from YouTube. So I want to say thank you again, Tim, for joining us. It's been a great talk. I've enjoyed learning how to photograph the Milky Way. I might have to dig out my old digital camera and give it a try.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much. Appreciate you inviting me, and I'm looking forward to when I can get back in a plane again and head over to Vancouver Island and maybe have a chance to see that telescope.
It'd be a pleasure to have you.
Yeah, we'd love to have you.
You bet.
Thanks so much. And
Take
that
care.
brings
Clear
us
sky.
right to 8:30. So I pretty much on the dot, I think, unless this, yeah, no, both of my clocks here are correct. So thank you everyone for joining us for this Saturday night star party. Thanks again to Tim for his excellent talk. Be sure again to like and subscribe if you're on our YouTube video, so it goes out to more folks. You can follow us and get notified of any new Saturday night star parties or other events by following us with @FriendsDAO on pretty much any social media. And finally, be sure to check out our website or scroll up in the chat to find the link to register for the Astronomy Day on May 15th. Once again, thank you all for joining us and have an excellent evening.